Ooh, yeah! Welcome back. This is exactly my type of video. Whitewashed Radicals, How We Sanitize Our Icons. This is by Overzealots. He's a pretty far left-wing guy. Does short essay videos, or kind of short, medium-style essay videos. And we're going to go over this video. It's basically right up my alley.
When you think of pop culture icons like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., Tupac Shakur, Mark Twain, and Nelson Mandela, the first things that probably come to mind are physicist, peaceful activist, musician, author, and beloved politician. What likely doesn't come to mind are labels like socialist, anti-capitalist, communist, anti-imperialist, or freedom fighter willing to take up arms. Why is that? Why is the mainstream narrative so eager to use these figures to serve its goals, yet when it comes time to acknowledge their radical politics, it suddenly can't be bothered, acting as if...
Because it doesn't show things from across the spectrum. It only shows the right-wing fascist view that America wants you to know about.
If those parts of their legacy don't even exist. I mean, MLK, the dude's a hero. He championed civil rights at a time where the things he was saying were unpopular. He was incredibly brave and a symbol for perseverance in the fight for justice. Mainstream politicians today have no choice but to praise the man for his bravery and act as though they would have been on his side back in his day. But if history has shown us anything, it's that political moderates and status quo defenders are in favor of every human rights movement, except for the current one. And that's just it. All of the figures I'll be talking about in this video presented a challenge to the status quo. Their legacies are undeniable, and to avoid speaking about these figures would be impossible. So how does the mainstream narrative fit these radicals into public discourse? Well, it pretends that they weren't actually all too radical, that they weren't a threat to the status quo, that they were at most liberals, akin to the American Democratic Party, maybe. But this is a gross misrepresentation of history and a sanitization of the radical politics held by these beloved figures. If we're going to invoke the legacies of these icons, let's not do them the injustice of pretending that they were mere political moderates when their radical beliefs were an inseparable part of who they were. From beloved authors like Mark Twain, who openly opposed American imperialism in the Philippines, calling himself an anti-imperialist, and declaring he was opposed to having the eagle put its talons on any other land, to socialist satirists like Kurt Vonnegut, to politicians like Nelson Mandela, who praised, supported, and trained alongside the armed resistance fighters of French-occupied Algeria. This video will offer a glimpse into the beliefs of these figures that are often censored. Quick disclaimer before we go any further, this video is not a blanket approval of the character of these figures. Many of them were flawed in their own ways, as we all are. I'll just be shining a light on the radical aspects of their characters that are purposefully forgotten. So before you feel the need to remind me that Albert Einstein's personal life was pretty questionable, yeah, I know, that has nothing to do with his politics. Speaking of his politics, what were they?
Do you support Israel?
When Albert wasn't writing about mass energy equivalents or the serpentine shape of streams, he didn't shy away from expressing his dislike toward capitalism. He disliked the fact that the ruling class could often trace their power back to colonial conquest. They seized for themselves a monopoly of the land and appointed a priesthood from among their own ranks. Einstein wrote in his 1949 essay, Why Socialism?, in which he set out to make the case for exactly what the title suggests. He affirmed the idea that human development was unfortunately still in a predatory phase due to the way that capitalism and rugged individualism stripped the individual away from society and forced them to hyper-focus solely on themselves with little regard for the well-being of others. In Einstein's view, this played a role in the deterioration of the fabric of society and the dismantling of our humanity. Einstein argued that a capitalist economy was detrimental to a person's development and maturation, that it just wasn't good for us and it would not yield ideal results. He believed capitalism would cause us to retract from one another and become cold, callous, and indifferent to the suffering of our neighbors. He
Imagine that, Einstein being right.
Worried we would eventually forget that while individual achievements and liberties are valuable and worth striving for, they're ultimately made possible within the context of a broader society, and that society's well-being should not be ignored. The individual is able to think, feel, strive, and work by himself, but he depends so much upon society in his physical, intellectual, and emotional existence that it's impossible to think of him or to understand him outside the framework of society. It is society which provides man with food, clothing, a home, the tools of work, language, the forms of thought, and most of the content of thought. His life is made possible through the labor and the accomplishments of the many millions past and present who are all hidden behind the small word, society. It is evident, therefore, that the dependence of the individual upon society is a fact of nature which cannot be abolished. Capitalism and its
I think Einstein would have been in the Green Party.
accompanying obsession with individualism, Einstein believed, would ultimately lead us to resent one another, to resent the very society that made possible all we enjoy and take for granted, by turning us against each other. The individual has become more conscious than ever of his dependence upon society, but he does not experience the dependence as a positive asset, as an organic tie, as a protective force, but rather as a threat to his natural rights, or even to his economic existence. To Einstein, this was more than just an economic discussion, though he did briefly address the logistics. It transcended that and became a question of salvaging the unique characteristics of humankind and preserving our ability to empathize and build with one another. The economic anarchy of capitalist society as it exists today is, in my opinion, the real source of the evil. We see before us a huge community of producers, the members of which are unceasingly striving to deprive each other of the fruits of their collective labor, not by force, but on the whole in faithful compliance with legally established rules. Private capital tends to become concentrated in few hands, he goes on to write. And to Einstein, this would inevitably lead to an oligarchy of private capital, the enormous power of which cannot be effectively checked even by a democratically organized political society. He foresaw that private capital...
It's so weird though, it started as an oligarchy. I don't understand why smart people, even like Einstein, wouldn't say that, like, oh, it's been an oligarchy, it's still an oligarchy, we're maintaining an oligarchy, we need to totally change it. Like, I know he's talking about capitalism, talking about changing capitalism, or going at the capitalist, but still, what is a slave owner but an oligarch? If you have a plantation, you are the plantation owner is the oligarch, right? He has his family the way he wants it. He owns all this land and owns people even. That so weird that people act like, oh, if we don't do something now, we're going to become an oligarchy. Yes, we've been an oligarchy for quite some time.
Capitalists would become powerful enough to buy off our schools, radio stations, newspapers, and even politicians.
They don't have to buy it off. They made it. They started this country, and they made the schools and everything since the whole time. Like, the 1 or 5% has always been in control of the West.
The anti-democratic nature of a prolonged capitalist society is abundantly clear today, but keep in mind, he wrote this in 1949, and history, at least in my opinion, has vindicated him. The obsession with...
I guess in the 40s, stuff was kind of good from the, like, you know, the mid to late 30s to the 70s or whatever. We had high taxes and a more even society.
Profit over utility, the overall instability of the capitalist mode of production leading to inevitable economic catastrophes. Einstein was very critical of it all, and the solution he proposed was socialism. I'm convinced that there is one way to eliminate these grave evils, namely through the establishment of a socialist economy, accompanied by an educational system which would be oriented towards social goals. In such an economy, the means of production are owned by society itself and are utilized in a planned fashion. He finishes off his essay by reminding us that a planned economy alone is not socialism, and that it must be implemented in a humanistic way that allots dignity and liberty to the individual. Hey, it's editor Isaac here. As I was teasing this video, the one that you're currently watching, someone put me onto a similar piece about Einstein with similar messaging, a lot more detail, and an incredible analysis by Dr. Fatima. And I wanted to share it with you guys because it's a really great video by a really great creator, so go check it out. So you might be wondering why I walked you through his essay instead of just leaving it at, yeah, dude was a socialist. And that's because it's important to understand just how much of a socialist he was, how deeply he despised capitalism, how strongly he believed it would literally deteriorate the essence of humanity if it wasn't discarded. He was actually such a troublemaker back in his day that the FBI compiled a massive file on him because of his radical views. Some even suspected he was a communist spy. But when we talk about him today, this side is strategically left out. Instead, his name is used as a synonym for genius by the very same groups of people who would hate the way he thought if they actually knew him. It's a pattern we see over and over. Radicals get sanded down, their politics erased so they can be safely celebrated without challenging the status quo.
If you're a man who makes at least 100...
From musical legends like Tupac Shakur, whose affinity for revolutionary leftist causes is seldom acknowledged, to literary icons like Jean-Paul Sartre, whose writings now appear on the Instagram stories of liberals who would likely disapprove of everything he stood for if they actually knew what that was. I mean, this is hilarious. This guy spent the past 18 months calling any and everyone a terrorist sympathizer, then turns around and starts posting Sartre quotes on the gram, completely oblivious to Jean-Paul's strong support for anti-colonial armed resistance and the FLN in Algeria. If Sartre were alive today, H3H3 Productions would be making fucking content nukes about him. I mean, while we're on the topic, I might as well show you what Sartre wrote in the preface for Frantz Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, in which he takes aim at liberals and political moderates who live in the imperial core. It's true, you are not colonists, but you are not much better. They were your pioneers. You sent them overseas. They made you rich. You warned them if they shed too much blood, you would pretend to disown them. The same way a state, no matter which one, maintains a mob of agitators, provocateurs, and spies abroad, whom it disowns once they are caught. You, who are so liberal, so humane, who take the love of culture to the point of affectation, you pretend to forget that you have colonies where massacres are committed in your name. Another figure whose legacy is just too big to ignore, so instead it's sanitized and declawed, is the late, great Martin Luther King Jr. Every year around MLK Day, or the anniversary of his assassination, we get to see all the corporate media outlets run their annual segment about the man and how he would definitely hate the opposing political party if he were alive today.
I was thinking, like, if he were alive today, I wonder what he'd think about a Democrat Party that believes it can regain power by living in a constant state of protest.
He stressed the content of one's character, remember? He would be furious if he saw these pesky protesters constantly bitching about systemic and structural...
That's kind of insane, because he was like the #1 protester, right? That's what he was known for. Do people not know that? Like the busing and stuff, like he went to jail in Alabama, like they didn't know what the 40 acres and a mule was. Do people not know that Martin Luther King was doing protests all the time?
Reform, right? Wrong. Like super wrong, actually. If there's one thing about the man's legacy that gets constantly swept under the rug, it's his desire for actual economic change in regards to the institutions of America. He stressed the significant link between the need for systemic change on a material level and the ideological progressivism that would follow. In King's The Three Evils of Society speech, he said, "We must also realize that the problems of racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. We are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism," he said in a 1966 speech in front of his staff.
We will make his dream come true.
Yeah, that's great, man. Everyone should strive to uphold King's dream of equality and harmony, but we should also strive to uphold his ideas of economic reconstruction instead of pretending like they don't exist. See, defenders of the status quo, liberal and conservative alike, invoke MLK whenever it's convenient, but they strategically ignore a crucial part of his perspective. Around the time of his death, his disapproval rating was 63%. The same political forces that now whitewash his legacy despised him when he was alive. It's only now that he can no longer mobilize the masses or threaten the capitalist system that he's been safely recast as an American hero, as a political moderate even. But King had some choice words for the political moderate, particularly of the Caucasian variety, and it's safe to say that he wouldn't approve of his legacy being used to legitimize milquetoast politics. In his controversial letter from a Birmingham jail, King writes, "I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the African American's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who
The white moderate, the Democrat.
prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action,' who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the African American
Democrats can set the timetable telling us it's not the time right now. It's not the time right now. Wait, because Donald Trump is so bad or this and that. Nah. It's not you. It's not for you to tell us when the time is to make the change. We need to make the change for us, and we need to make the change for everybody. The Democratic Party does not give two shits or about you.
agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the African American to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. For obvious reasons, this letter of his has been selectively remembered and...
Yes, that's why you need to leave the Democratic Party. The bullshit. Come to the Green Party, go to DSA, go to the Libertarian Party, go anywhere other than the Democratic Party. Even go to the Republican Party. Just in the liberal Democratic Party, that is the worst party that there is. Go ahead and be fascist or go ahead and be left wing. But this halfway middle ground, I don't make real decisions and I'm just gonna let the fascists do the stuff instead of us. It's not what it is. It's not the business.
Subjected to soft erasure. King's critique of the white moderate, someone who pays lip service to a cause but denounces every effective method of achieving change, still rings true today. Take the oppression of Palestinians, one of, if not the most pressing issue of our time. The political moderate will assure you that they're on the right side of history, that they feel for the Palestinians, yet they disapprove of every and any action taken to resist the suffering, the apartheid, and the genocide, even peaceful and non-lethal ones. In regard to the Palestinian plight, figures like Nelson Mandela
and that they don't oppose the genocide. We feed the genocide. The right feeds the genocide, but when the liberals were in, when the Democrats were in, they were feeding the genocide too. So what is the difference? It's not only that they won't stop it, they feed it, they help it.
Lethal ones. In regard to the Palestinian plight, figures like Nelson Mandela and his contributions toward dismantling apartheid in South Africa will often get brought up. Certain groups like to paint him as if he were opposed to violent resistance, and in some cases, as if he were a full-blown pacifist. But that isn't true.
Want to know how Tom, Mike, and
Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation, was the armed paramilitary wing of the ANC, co-founded by Mandela himself. Mandela grew increasingly in favor of anti-colonial armed resistance once it became clear to him that peaceful means of resisting simply weren't working. In a now famous speech given by Mandela during his 1964 Riviona trial, Mandela defended his choice to escalate to violent resistance. We felt that without violence, there would be no way open to the African people to succeed in their struggle against the principle of white supremacy. All lawful modes of expressing opposition to this principle had been closed by legislation, and we were placed in a position in which we had to either accept a permanent state of inferiority or to defy the government. We chose to defy the law. We first broke the law in a way which avoided any recourse to violence when this form was legislated against, and then the government resorted to a show of force to crush opposition to its policies. Only then did we decide to answer violence with violence. It would be unrealistic and wrong for African leaders to continue preaching peace and nonviolence at a time when the government met our peaceful demands with force. The US even had Mandela on their terror watch list until 2008 when Bush signed a bill to remove him. Gotta love the irony of...
When Bush signed a bill to remove him? I didn't even know that. So yeah, Democrats didn't even do that. Democrats, what do they do for us? Nothing.
An actual cold-blooded mass murderer deciding who is and isn't a terrorist. Mandela's worldview and actions in South Africa were greatly inspired by the FLN in Algeria. He praised the Algerian National Liberation Front many times and even traveled to Morocco in 1962 to train alongside them. The Algerian army made me a man, Mandela declared. It's worth noting that the FLN was considered a terrorist organization by the US during their fight for liberation against France's brutal occupation. After they exhausted...
anybody trying to fight against their own occupation is a terrorist to the West, because the West wants to occupy everybody.
Peaceful means of resistance, they eventually opted to up the ante, and they carried out bombings, assassinations, and urban guerrilla warfare in the attempt to free themselves. The US also considered them to be a broader communism threat due to their links with socialist governments, yet Mandela's support for them remained consistent and unwavering. He never denounced their armed resistance because he understood that their original peaceful means of resisting did nothing but lead to events like the Sétif and Guelma massacre, where peaceful Algerian civilians and protesters were slaughtered by the French. Far from condemning their armed resistance, Mandela was actually deeply motivated by it.
And so this is why the left doesn't have much of a say throughout the world. The right-wing West kills us. They will go do massacres. They take our leaders out. Fred Hampton hasn't been mentioned in this video, but a lot of the Black Panthers, all like so many of our left-wing communist socialist leaders just get murdered or murked by the West.
Upheld around with plenty of people the West considered enemies, from Castro to Gaddafi, the kinds of leaders who backed the ANC when the so-called free world wouldn't. Nelson was so thankful for Castro's and the Cuban military's support in ending apartheid that he traveled to Cuba in 1991 to show his gratitude in person. We have come here today recognizing our great debt to the Cuban people. What other country has such a history of selfless behavior as Cuba has shown for the people of Africa? How many countries benefit from Cuban healthcare professionals and educators? How many of these volunteers are now in Africa? What country has ever needed help from Cuba and has not received it? How many countries threatened by imperialism or fighting for their freedom have been able to count on the support of Cuba? When you, Comrade Fidel, yesterday said that our cause is your cause, I know that that sentiment came from the bottom of your heart and that is the feeling of all of the people of revolutionary Cuba. This side of his character, these deep-seated beliefs of his, would never be known if you just accepted the mainstream narrative about him. It's very important that these historical figures and pop culture icons are celebrated and cherished for the good that they've done, for the achievements and innovation that they've imparted on society. But when we only tell parts of their stories and leave out the radical aspects of their characters, we do them a disservice through omission. These great minds were great for a reason. Let that reason be known.
Well, my president. My president.
My brother.
Presidente, my brother.
How are you?
My brother.
Please. Please. Very nice to see you.
Están contentos de verlo.
Please sit down.
Están contentos. Por favor, tenga bien
Please sit down.
sentarse.
Please sit down.
Siéntese.
Now, one thing before we say anything.
Una cosa antes de hablar, nada.
Before we say anything,
Antes de hablar absolutamente de cualquier tema,
you must tell me when you are coming to South
me
Africa.
tiene que decir cuándo viene para Sudáfrica.
You say, no, just a moment, just a moment.
No, un momentito.
Es seguro, si ya yo recibí.
The sooner the better.
And we have had a visit from a wide
Y nos ha
variety of
visitado una
people.
gran cantidad de personas.
And our friend Cuba,
Y nuestro amigo Cuba,
which helped us in training our people,
que nos ayudó a entrenar a nuestra gente,
gave us resources to
que nos
get
dio
on with our
recursos,
struggle,
que nos ayudaron tanto en nuestra
trained
lucha,
our people
que
as
entrenó a nuestros
doctors and so
combatientes, a
on.
nuestros médicos.
You have
Socialist,
not come to
evil.
our country.
Cuba no ha venido a visitarnos, usted no ha ido a visitar.
When are you coming?
¿Cuándo viene?
No he visitado a mi patria
I
surafricana.
haven't visited my South African homeland
La
yet.
quiero como una patria.
I love it as a
Quiero por él
homeland.
y por el pueblo.
I love it as a homeland as I love you and the South
When
African
are you
people.
coming to South
Pero
Africa?
¿cuándo viene Sudáfrica?
Creo que va a tener que ser hoy mismo. Va a
I
tener
think it will have to be
presentar.
today. I will have to fly back with you.
No, you are very
Él
true.
se va a las 10.
You are leaving at 10, so we're catching the plane together.
Poco después, Fidel sí pudo ir a Sudáfrica, y en el camino hizo escala en Namibia, donde fue recibido por Sandu Yoma, el líder de ese
Check
país.
that out, though.
Welcome to the Republic of Namibia,
Bienvenido a la República
Now
de
we shaking
Namibia.
hands, hugging straight
the
up.
country which you helped to
El país
liberate,
que-
For
be
yourselves. You
liberated.
brought us educate our healthcare and stuff. We help train our doctors and things. Help the revolution. See, that's why the West, that's why we don't
En
like them.
Sudáfrica, Mandela lo esperaba.
Fidel Castro, we look at him as a evil person, but Nelson Mandela, he's a great hero.
Fidel fue invitado a hablar al Parlamento sudafricano.
This is why we don't like Fidel Castro.
Conviértase Sudáfrica en modelo
I'm sorry, I
de un
cannot
mundo
translate.
futuro más justo y más humano.
Let South Africa be a model of a more just
Okay.
and more humane future.
That's what's up.
Si ustedes pueden, todos podemos.
If you can do it, we will all be able to do it.
The capitalists can't stand that. I mean, I put the video out yesterday about Ibrahim Traore, or Traore. They're still trying to get away from the capitalist Western thumb, get from out under the thumb of the Western capitalists. So this, I mean, it's still the same fight, but I mean, they're getting there, and I mean, we need to stop. We need to stop voting our duopoly, our oligarchy, and really care about other people. Like if you cared about other people in other countries and even the homeless here, like the most downtrodden here, you could not vote for either duopoly party. Like you couldn't. See, this is how socialist governments would work together, rather than these capitalist governments wanting to fight everybody and be all crazy and whatnot. But you know, you guys know this stuff because you come across the spectrum.